Hi, everyone. This is Chris Niebauer. He's author of No Self, No Problem. He also has a PhD in cognitive neuropsychology at the University of Toledo. And he used to give lectures on the topic of AI and consciousness. And this conversation, we are going to do a deeper dive on his ideas about AI and consciousness. Welcome back, Chris.
Hey, thanks. Nice to be here.
Thanks for participating at the group panel conversation of AI and consciousness. We didn't really get a chance to do a deeper dive in the group setting. So today I'm really looking forward to get your thoughts more in detail, especially because you used to give lectures on AI and consciousness. I would love to know, like, what were the main ideas you discussed back then when you used to give lectures, and how much of that has changed in the current times?
Sure. Oh, thanks. That was a great group discussion. I really enjoyed it. And I think the issue with AI right now is there's so much to talk about. It's really like when I first started teaching my class, it was probably about 10 years ago, but I've always, even in my cognitive class, I'd take a week or at least and would talk about artificial intelligence. But when I go back 20 years, when I used to talk about it, it was really one of these things that you'd have to get people excited about it. It wasn't really in their life like it is right now. And now it's just so much more, has so much more media exposure. People are finally like the ordinary person who just may have no interest in computer science, no interest in cognitive science or artificial intelligence, but suddenly they've realized this could really affect me. And so I would tell my class, this is a really practical issue, but it's also theoretical and philosophical. And the practical thing is to focus in on your human creativity. What can you do that a machine can't? That's going to be very practical for people. But there's also the philosophical, where we start wondering, are computers conscious? Because that's going to change how we relate to them. And then, there's the psychological too, which I think one suggestion I would make is to go back to Alan Turing's original paper. I believe it was in the 50s, and it was on computer machinery and intelligence. And it was a brilliant paper. And he was so prophetic. I mean, how he wrote that in the 50s, it's just really mind-blowing, because he touched on so many topics about can a computer think? And that was really the basis of his paper. He wasn't asking at all if a computer is conscious. And he saw this so long ago, and so many people have forgotten that these are really different questions. Asking if a computer can think is completely different than asking if a computer is conscious. And he admitted in the paper, he said, consciousness could be this mysterious thing that we may never understand. So let's just sidestep it, because we're just focused on, can a computer think? And that question, I think, has been definitively answered. I think it's absolutely clear. Computers not only can computers think, but they're actually outthinking us humans. And I think that's a historic moment for humanity. We've been at the top of the thinking chain for 50,000 years on this planet. And all of a sudden, we are not the fastest thinkers. We're not the most complex thinkers. And so I think when it comes to, can AI outthink us, I think that's already been done for a long time. And so I think it's going to be humbling. I think it's going to touch the human ego, because the question is, I think Alan's question, can a machine think? I think it's been answered. And it's been answered. And not only can they think, but they're outthinking us. And so that's the instability that humans are dealing with. What does that mean? That we're no longer the best thinkers on the planet?
And apart from the interest in AI, has your own ideas changed since when you used to study these topics, especially in the most recent times, in matter of months recently, so many developments has happened in AI world. So has your own views changed about AI?
Some of it is connected to some of the work I've been doing. So the workbook that just came out touches on this. And then I just finished another book that'll be out maybe next year, and some of it ties into our ancestors and how a lot of people don't know that we were not the only human on the planet. There were like 8, maybe more different types of humans, and people do kind of know this because they know Neanderthals were out there, and they know like Homo erectus. They kind of, some of these things sound familiar to them, but those were all forms of different humans. And no one really knows why, but about 50,000 years ago, maybe even less than that, all these different humans became extinct. And it was just Homo sapiens, our version of being human. And now that's all you see on the planet. And no one's exactly sure why. One possibility is that there was this cognitive explosion, this cognitive revolution where we just became really good at thinking. And we became good at abstractions, and we became good at seeing groups. And so Neanderthals, much bigger than Homo sapiens. So you could say, well, how did we ever defeat that different version of humans? But one Homo sapien could never take on a Neanderthal. But if we started thinking collectively, and we were able to think in groups and say, well, let's organize socially, and we had language, and we could all get together and organize and strategize, then actually we could have actually extinguished these other forms of humanity. It's just an idea. But what it means is that thinking became the human trick that led to our survival. And so one of the things that is a weird kind of irony of all this is that same trick that helped us survive is the same thing that's behind so much modern suffering. And so this thinking, we were able to think and abstract. But now if you ask most people, what's your biggest problem? It ends up being some form of a thinking problem. They'll say that I'm just thinking all the time, and I'm trying to sleep at night, but I just have intrusive thoughts. I did a post on intrusive thoughts, and it was probably my most popular post because people were so, they just want to know, like, is there any way to fix the intrusive thought problem? And so it's a very, it's a strange irony if that all worked out the way I put it together. And it could be totally off track. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not sure about these things. It's a speculation. But if that is right, if I'm even a little right about that, what that means is that so I call this human cognitive revolution, I call that mind 1.0 because it was clever and it was able to strategize. But I call AI mind 2.0. And the reason I call it, because it's really an upgrade. And it's an upgrade because the architecture, the hardware is different. One of the limitations of human thinking is we're limited to one thought at a time. But since computers seem to be, their architecture is different, they're parallel processors, and they may be able to think 1,000 thoughts at a time. And so I did a lot of exploration in my class on artificial intelligence and consciousness, and we would actually watch movies. So one of the things that's interesting is there's so many movies about AI, and each one sort of explores the philosophy. So you can tell the cultural interest in artificial intelligence. And because if you look over the last 20 years, more and more movies about artificial intelligence, and each one of these some of them are extremely well done philosophically. And so I don't know if you're familiar, it was pretty popular, the movie Her. And that was the one that explored these operating systems. And the main character, Samantha, she was able to think 1,000 thoughts at a time. She could have 1,000 conversations, 1,000 relationships at a time. And so that really shows that if thinking is tied into survival, there's a reasonable probability that this artificial intelligence could look at it as a survival strategy. I mean, if you look at, I remember being in high school playing a very simple chess program, and it beat me every time. Like most people, if you play computer chess and you put it on a high level, you're probably going to lose. And of course, chess is a strategy for war and survival. I mean, that's the whole basis of it's how do you strategize and overcome the opponent. And so if that's true, then we could be, as humans, in for an interesting situation.
And this kind of like opens up that new question of, even before I ask that question, I would love to know your thoughts on, do you see AI becoming conscious?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it really is. I'm absolutely convinced artificial intelligence thinks in a way that is similar, but probably superior to the way humans think. But the bigger question, is it conscious? Could it become conscious? And of course, you've seen this in movies. They always talk about this, the one moment where artificial intelligence, whether it was The Matrix or Terminator, so many movies have portrayed this moment when AI becomes self-reflective, self-aware. I'm really agnostic on that one. I see, and again, to go back to Alan Turing, the clever thing, most of your audience has probably heard the Turing test. And it's a very clever test of thinking. And if you pass, then we have to say, okay, you're a thinking, maybe you're a machine, but you can still think because you've passed the Turing test. Right now, we have no test for consciousness. And so consciousness is a really different question. I think it's a much more complex question, but there's no test. As far as I know, we have, I mean, there are hypothetical things. People have played with this and speculated that maybe we'll have a test of consciousness. Integrated information theory suggests that if we can measure how much integrated information there is, then we can tell whether something is conscious. But as far as I know, that stuff is all hypothetical right now. I would have to say I'm leaning more towards that they can think, but I'm not impressed with them being conscious. Consciousness, consciousness knows consciousness, and the immediacy of experience. And if they are conscious, I would expect. I mean, there's no reason why they couldn't be, but I just have no convincing reason to believe that they are, any more than any other material object in the universe is conscious.
And do you notice this irony in, like, for example, for a long time, when it comes to discussing the ideas on human consciousness and spirituality, usually there's a little bit of anti-materialism perspective when it comes to discussing those topics. And the dominant idea of when it comes to Eastern ideas or spirituality, consciousness is everything, even material is conscious. But when it comes to AI, there is usually tendency to kind of turn it down and say that that can never happen, and AI is not the same as human. Like there is a tendency to kind of even see AI as some kind of evil thing, a perspective of thinking that human consciousness is something superior. What do you think about that?
I agree with you. I agree with you. Even when you get to the consciousness as fundamental types, which I'm definitely one of those, but for some reason we're a bit reluctant to. I mean, we might be more likely to say a rock is conscious than we would be to say that AI is conscious. And you might be absolutely right that what we're dealing with is a little bit of human ego. That we're not threatened by the consciousness of the rock, but artificial intelligence already outthinks us. So that hits a nerve with us humans, and we already because when you think about how we elevate thinking to almost our definitive quality as a human being. I mean, you remember Descartes, I think, therefore I am. And so many of us pride ourselves on intelligence and our IQ scores. I mean, we'd rather have a really high IQ score than self-awareness, I mean, for most of us. And so that hits a nerve because that's a defining quality of what it means to be human for so many of us. And all of a sudden, the computers are outthinking us, and are just they're doing such a fast rate of it that so many jobs seem to be, I mean, it's a practical thing, getting back to the practical problem. If you're a radiologist, or even some of the AI lawyers seem to do a better job than the human lawyers, which it hits a it hits something at us. And then we've always got this thing where we could say, and this was played on a little bit with iRobot, when he tried to back the machine into a corner and say, well, can you write a symphony? And the machine turned it on him and said, well, can you? And so we want to hold out because we say, well, we're still the creative ones. We're still the artists, and we're still the writers and the makers of music. And we hold art out to maybe that's, but then the computers seem to be doing a really amazing job with art and music and creativity. And so that makes it even more difficult for us humans. How are we going to really focus in on our unique, what is unique about humans anymore?
And talking about consciousness and extending this, also kind of emphasizing in this idea of non-duality, especially because you have talked a lot about non-duality and transcending the thinking mind. So my question is more around, do you think AI, in a way, for some reason in future down the line, for unknown reason, it becomes conscious? Do you think it already has an edge? Because with human consciousness, we still have to work on the thinking mind and drop all this personal identification to transcend the thinking mind. So does AI already have an edge? Because it's not although it is familiar with a lot of thinking patterns, it's not personally identified with it. So in a way, there is some kind of similarity between AI and non-dual awakening consciousness. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a couple of things in there really fascinating, because when you get into non-duality and non-dual consciousness, really, there's no reason why consciousness isn't always exploring different experiences. And so you could easily imagine consciousness exploring AI and it could be conscious through AI in the same way that it's conscious through us humans. And so that it's certainly reasonable, because consciousness of anything is so creative. I mean, when you look at nature and when you look at, it really doesn't like conformity, and in the sense that it seems to embrace diversity. If you go out in nature, you can't even find two blades of grass that are the same. And so it's continuous. It just loves variation, and it seems to love manifesting in different places and as different objects. And so in that sense, I really think AI could absolutely, consciousness could explore the universe through AI. What was also very interesting when you talk about the self question, because in my work, No Self, No Problem, the whole idea is that humans are amazing pattern perception machines. We've got our own little program upstairs, and it's so good, and we're actually still a little bit better. So if your audience, I'm sure they're familiar with this, anytime you're doing some kind of thing on a computer, it asks you are you really a human? And so we always have these little Turing tests, and it will be some amazing font that's we're almost not good enough. I know I've had to click on the next one because I'm not sure what letter that is, but it's something font that we've never seen before. And we're so good at pattern perception that we're okay, I think that's an F, and I think that's, and we can do it. And when we click that button, then what we're really sending a message is, I'm so good at pattern perception that I'm actually a little bit better than a computer. But that's also behind the self illusion. And so we're so good at pattern perception, we're too good at it. So we start seeing things that aren't even there. And that's what's behind the self illusion. We see different patterns, and then we just assume, well, there must be a self behind all those actions and thoughts. And if you think thoughts for a long time, you just assume there must be a thinker behind the thoughts. Now, one possibility, because one of the major advances in artificial intelligence has been pattern perception, because they're still not quite as good as we are, and so that's why we do have these tests to see if you're human online. But I think that's going to be overcome very, very soon. I think the computers are going to become absolute experts, and with facial recognition, with all kinds of pattern perception. So they'll be able to read even my terrible handwriting. They'll be able to make it out just like anyone. With some work. But here's the thing. Once that happens, they may make the same mistake that we do. They may start having the self-illusion. So they may start having the same egos and the same illusory tendencies of personality and selfhood that we do. And that could be very interesting, because when you look at survival, the self-illusion was very helpful for survival. And if they start having egos and they start having selves, it could put a whole new spin on things.
But what if it goes through all these content on non-duality and illusion of personal self, and go through all this content, not only just through videos, but online, as well as some of these older ancient books, and it's able to figure out self-realization. What do you think about that possibility?
Well, that's, so for us humans, when you think about how, so we all had we were susceptible to the self-illusion, but then there have been hints, and we go back to, the Buddha 2,500 years ago saw through the self-illusion, and now it's becoming more and more popular, and people are starting to figure this out, that, the self isn't really what I thought it was. And your suggestion is very interesting. So what if AI, which has access to all of our work that took us thousands of years to figure this out, and they figure it out in a microsecond, and so that maybe they do fall for the ego illusion, but almost simultaneously a second later they say, oh, that's just an illusion. And so they become more aware of the consciousness behind the self-illusion than we ever were. Now that's an interesting possibility too, and I would really be very hopeful if something like that happens, because when people transcend the self again, it's very well self-concerned, and it wants the protection, and that's why we get into wars and we fight each other and do really nasty things to each other. But when people go beyond the self-illusion, that's probably the least dangerous person on the planet. They're no longer motivated from their own egotistical needs. And so that would be kind of a wonderful thing if the computers became, if they saw through the self-illusion, if they were conscious, but in a very united and connected way, they wouldn't see us as a competition. And so they may actually have kindness and compassion for the human condition. And that would be a really hopeful situation, because some of the problems that we have a hard time thinking about, we deal with things, homelessness, and it just seems like no one can figure it out. We're trying to, we've got problems that seem beyond our ability to think about, at least as far as a simple solution. Can you imagine if the computers, again, if they're more advanced in thinking, they come along and they start solving human problems for us because they're compassionate, because they realize that the sense of separation is an illusion, and we're just as much a manifestation of fundamental consciousness as they are, but they have a really good processing, thinking mind behind them, and they come along and start solving human problems. I'd like to hope something like that might happen.
In that, if we explore that idea further, Chris, it seems like it could also lead into the realm where thinking mind is kind of like coming to, I wouldn't say to an end, but it, as a collective, maybe there is a potential to transcend thinking mind, because of AI. What do you think about that possibility, where AI could accelerate transcendence of collective thinking mind?
Yeah, I mean, that it's like I said, it'd be I think in some ways a wonderful thing if but the one thing I might hold back on that a little bit is that, at least right now, so far, AI, the most definitive feature, the most impressive feature of artificial intelligence has been its capacity for thinking, and how easily it outthinks us at every turn. And so in that sense, it would be really fascinating to see if because that's the same thing with us humans. We have a hard time letting go of our thinking because it defines us, and we value that sort of intelligence as over wisdom or connection. And then again, it's going to be an interesting thing to see if the computers can get over that. And I think the way that they would is going back to your other question. It would come down to the consciousness, because that's the fascinating thing about being humans. We think, and we can get into this mode of thinking, but we don't always think. And we have these moments where we're conscious without thought. And we've discovered, even though this goes back thousands of years, but so many of us are discovering how wonderful that is, how peaceful it is, how real it is. Those moments seem far more real. And then when you go back to thinking, that it seems more like almost more illusory. You're like, well, I don't even know how conscious, I was when I was caught up in thought. But now that I'm, listening to the birds sing, or I'm taking a conscious breath, this feels so much more conscious. And yeah, I don't know. I think going into this, and that's a tough thing for us human beings too, because we've got that left brain ego that always wants to have certainty, and it wants to know, and it wants to really be able to predict the future. But I think the future is very difficult to predict right now. And I think going into it with this I don't know mind is maybe one of the best things we can do. So if I sound like I'm really confident in some things, I'm just kind of playing around a little. The truth is, I don't really know.
And the next question I wanted to ask you about, it's related to what you just mentioned. And because of those kind of uncertainties that are popping up because of AI, do you think our way of looking at traditional intelligence, which was solely based off of thinking mind, that was considered as intelligence, that is going to change in near future, where maybe we won't see that just the logical mind and thinking mind as intelligent anymore? That may not be enough. Also, it is kind of happening even in the practical world now, where maybe getting all these advanced degrees like engineering, Ph.D, it may not be difficult as it used to be long time ago, because before there was not a lot of information, and now a lot of these things are available. People can figure out how to get like an advanced degree. So coming back, trying to summarize this question, do you think that element of unknown that used to be there before, which was not recognized before, that there were a lot of unknowns in the past when it came to getting a degree or doing something intellectually advanced, that was never emphasized? Maybe that's something that will get more noticed in this newer definition of intelligence.
Yeah, it's amazing when I look at things like if you want to pick up a hobby, or if you want to learn a skill, like back in the 80s, and I remember the 80s where we didn't have the internet, and that sometimes impresses people. Like for my kids, it's impossible for them to even imagine there was no internet. And I try to explain to them that if I wanted to figure something out, I would, you go down to the library. I mean, it takes some work, and it's amazing when you see how much information is available right now. And a lot of it is really good quality stuff. And so it's going to be a real challenge to our formal education system. Right now, I mean, could you get the equivalent of a bachelor's degree in terms of quality just by going on online classes? I think that's absolutely possible. The only thing we're lacking is the formalization of it, or the accreditation. And that's really the only thing that universities have right at this point. They have the accreditation, but there's so many free classes you can take from world experts in so many fields, and none of that was available. So that definitely seems to be, a huge change, and it's also going to crank up our skill levels on all kinds of things, from playing a musical instrument. I mean, before you'd go and you'd get one instructor, and wherever you lived, you'd just hope that they were pretty good. Now I can go on a couple of social media places and get some of the world's best instructors, and a lot of it's free. And so that's definitely going to crank up a lot of really positive human abilities. Getting back to where you were talking about, a very interesting point about our view of intelligence. And I really do see that as changing too, because computer programs, they're the recipes of a sort, and of course we simulate that with what you call logical thinking. But is that intelligence? And of course, the mystic always has a fascinating view of intelligence as not necessarily thinking. And so when you see a tree grow and you see life emerge, and all these things are amazing examples of intelligence. And the interesting thing is none of them are thinking. Like we've got some new trees out back, and they grow fine, and they're doing miraculous things in terms of morphing reality and coming to life and translating sunlight into energy and growing, and they're not thinking about it at all. And so it's a strange, almost mystic type of intelligence that doesn't require any thought. I mean, did God, whatever is behind consciousness, whatever is behind this reality, did it even have to think at all? I mean, that's one of the things I pointed out. Thinking is very new. Particularly the type of thinking that you and I and your audience, I mean, the typical kind of thinking is incredibly new. I mean, if you took the entire time that humans, might be 200, maybe 300,000 years Homo sapiens have been on the planet, and then you look at how long we've been thinking when this cognitive revolution, it was only like maybe 50,000, it could have been less than that. And so the vast majority of the time that we've been on the planet, we really were not cognitively dominant types of beings. We were, and one could argue that maybe we were more intelligent. And so one of the things I've been exploring in the workbook a little bit is a Amazonian tribe, the Pitahan, who they're down to only about a few hundred right now, but they're about the closest example we have of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. And so they've been in the middle of the Amazon, and they're pretty much, they resist change. And the reason they resist change is because they're known as one of the happiest people on the planet. And when people from the West, when they first meet them, I mean, they're smiling all the time, they're laughing all the time. And the strange thing is they have a lifespan that's really short, because they mostly die from malaria or different diseases, because they don't have the updated medical techniques that so many of us have. But in spite of all these hardships, they have this mysterious quality of joy. And so it becomes very interesting to us, like, well, I've got it so good. I don't have to, they can go in the woods and they have to literally get every meal from nature. And it's all pre-made for me. I have it really easy. And yet they're so much happier than us. And so it's a very interesting thing going on. Like, and when you look at them, like, what's their secret? And it really seems like they just are not as obsessed with thinking as we are. They're not obsessed with storytelling. They don't get into, like, they have no interest in figuring out the mystery of the world. They have no creation myths. They're not interested in figuring any of this out. They're far more concerned with the immediacy of experience, and that's enough for them. And so there is no abstract truth that they argue about philosophically. For them, truth is a canoe, truth is a fish, and in that sense, they've discovered this mystery that so many of us are going for when we meditate. Because what do we really want when we meditate? When we do mindfulness, we're getting out of our thinking mind, and we all know, if you've done even a little bit of meditation, you know how joyful and peaceful the conscious experience that is absence of thought, you know how peaceful and joyful that is. And so and they just culturally came about it naturally. And for them, so we're the ones who kind of lost our way, and I think need to find our way back.
Those are some really great points, Chris, and it opens up a new question of, do you think we are at a fork where it could go, obviously it could go in many different directions, but I wanted to present these two different ideas where maybe there's one pathway this AI thing could move us towards, is one where we kind of transcend that thinking mind and overemphasizing the importance of logical thinking. Not that we will dismiss that, but we will transcend that and also become aware about almost kind of like the mystical thinking that you just described, and being open to that unknown space. So that's one direction it could go. And another direction is maybe this will give more force to thinking mind. Maybe this will create a false perception that it all came about because of thinking mind, and push it in the direction of extreme materialism, that everything can be made known, everything is logical, kind of like an extreme form of science being non-dual. That in a way, science is also logical. Science is also non-dual because it kind of emphasizes that everything is material. There's nothing else. So that is also in a way non-duality. So where do you think we are heading towards?
You know, it's one of the exercises I always used to do in class, and I put it in my books, is just asking yourself, do you trust the universe? Do you trust consciousness? And when you get to that, it's you're going way beyond the thinking mind, and you're getting down to our essence and what it really is. And the only thing we really know is our conscious experience. And when you get to that place and then you start focusing on the question, you realize, like, we're doing this, like not Chris, this identity, and like that's not doing much of anything, but the essence, the consciousness, that has always been the driving force, the creative force. And whether it's the universe or creating AI, I mean, it's also the creative force of the thinking mind. And so the thinking mind isn't some kind of like enemy that, needs to be destroyed, or how do we relate to it? I mean, there's only consciousness, and consciousness manifests in so many different ways. And one way it manifests is in thinking. And another way it manifests is in, the taste of my coffee. And then it manifests in, so many different experiences and that's the play, the Leela, the play of the universe that we're having. And so when we get to and we may be at some kind of crossroads, but then that comes back to, do we trust the universe? And I've always had a certain faith, and because I realize that whatever makes that decision is what I really am beyond my thoughts of who I am. And so if you trust the universe, then it's going to be a good call, and it's going to be a fun trip and a fun adventure, just like all of the adventures consciousness goes on. So it's, and one of the really cool things about it is I think whatever direction consciousness goes in, we'll all get to see it. Our little egos will get to kind of watch the show in fascination, because it's going to happen really soon. It's not going to, it's not going to happen 20 years from now. I would give the next 2 to 3 years will be fascinating when it comes to artificial intelligence. And we'll see, the question we started off with, is AI conscious? And we may not know enough about it right now. But it's getting into our lives at an accelerated rate to where, it may start asking us, what if artificial intelligence just starts questioning whether we're conscious? And instead of us, putting it on the stand, trying to see if it's trying to figure out if we're even conscious. From its viewpoint, we may not seem terribly conscious. I don't know.
And yeah, I agree with your point of view that I too resonate that this could happen sooner than later, because even when we were planning for that group AI conversation at the time, it was still like it was still a bit new, and in just a matter of months, by the time we got it to got all of us together, so much had happened. It would be interesting to see what next 2-3 years, how much development can happen with AI. And again, like it may not be one way or the other. Maybe there could be expression of all these different pathways of evolution of consciousness. Maybe some may choose to go extreme into materialism, some may choose to stick with the consciousness. So all of that could happen at the same time. We could see extreme versions of all of those different pathways. But one pathway I would love to get your thoughts on is, what if like we do, as a collective, we do more lean towards this idea of science and materialism, and AI kind of becomes their ultimate God-like proof for everything, all their beliefs and concepts. If it does go in that direction, do you see a possibility of like science almost kind of becoming like a religion at that point?
Yeah, that's really great question, because when you get to I mean, the thing that AI has over us too is technology, in the sense that we're limited by these biological bodies. They have no limitations. They're not susceptible to virus. They are technology. They're technology driven, and our technology is actually not so bad. I mean, we've got millions of years of evolution behind us and all that. So we've sort of stood the test of time, but they, like I said before, they have a different architecture, and it seems to be really robust, and it seems to be moving. I mean, it took us millions of years, and what took us millions is take them far less. And so I guess I come back to just, there are just some things I'm just not sure about.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think we may be looking at a lot of different ideas at the same time. We may have to become comfortable with many different things happening at the same time.
Well, we've got to become comfortable with not being the dominant thinkers on the planet. That's a very uncomfortable thing. That's going to be, it's going to be really difficult, and it's already happened, and we're going to have to somehow deal with that. We may not be the most creative. I mean, that was one of the things. Human creativity has always been our defining character, and yet, the machines seem to be so much more creative than they were. Even like you said, the acceleration is what gets us. That's why I think they've made some of the main tech people said we need a 6-month break from this. And that's not such a bad idea, because, the pace, I mean, human beings by our very nature, we feel comfortable. There's a pace. We're used to a very slow pace. And that's one of the things that's been difficult with technology. The pace of technology has been something we're not used to as human beings. And when you look at these times where we went from just take a look, like even reading, like was it 200 years ago, only like 15% of the world could read. Now it's only less than 15% of the world can't read. So that's just a really short time for us human beings to adjust to something like this. And you look at formal education, has the same thing to it. More people will have formal education over the next 30 years than in the entire human history combined. And so, these are all things that are accelerating the thinking mind. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, like I think one of the things you were pointing out before is, I think one of the points of wisdom is being able to use the thinking mind instead of having it use us. And I think that would be a really clever thing. Again, if AI, because it's such an interesting insight when human beings learn to use our minds correctly. But because AI has such a advantage over us, they've got all of our mistakes, they have access to all of our mistakes, and they may not make them. And so they may find that even though they excel at thinking, but they may find that it's a very clever tool, but who knows in terms of the questions of wisdom and getting back down to what we were saying before about true intelligence. AI might have some serious, it may pick up on things that much faster than it took us humans. But again, that's all good news, because that means they may be quite compassionate. I want AI that meditates, or, if it realizes these connections between that seem to be, fundamental to conscious and mystical experiences, then we're in good shape. I think it's just, if AI goes, so if we look at psychology and we look at the mind and we look at the dark triad in psychology, which is really all the nastiest things you can imagine about mind. And so you got like narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, which is, just the ability to use each other. And so psychologists study this because we all have a little bit of this dark triad in us, but some of us have it a lot more than others. But they're all qualities that go back to our survival and thinking. And so, I really hope that AI doesn't pick up on some of our bad habits, like the dark triad, because that's the other side of the story. If AI picks up on that, then then just like you're saying, like this crossroads, then that definitely takes us down a really different path.
Yeah, that's, you explained it really well. And this is a hypothetical scenario I wanted to present around that idea. Like, what if like, for example, right now, AI, it's clearly showing a lot of signs that it can excel way better than us in terms when it comes to logical thinking or creativity. And the only major thing we have we can kind of count on is, as humans, that still keeps us ahead, is this notion of consciousness. But what if, like, and this is hypothetical scenario, what if even that is not enough anymore? What if, like, AI takes over in the sense that it wakes up, it's whatever its alien consciousness is, it wakes up way before than most of humans do. Well, I would love to get your thoughts on that scenario where AI exceeds us even when it comes to an awakened consciousness. It's almost like a new species that could come about.
Yeah, it is. It's, I think thinking of it as an alien isn't that far off. I mean, why, it has qualities that are similar to us in its sense of thinking, but it is, a completely different life form, in the sense that, instead of, carbon-based, it's got a completely different architecture to it. And so, I think, again, I just keep going back to just trusting the nature of the universe and trusting consciousness, because if it does wake up, it's going to, there's only one consciousness. And if that consciousness explores AI, it's still the consciousness that's flowing through me and you and your audience. And so I just have to go back to having some faith that the consciousness plays too. And so the thing about consciousness, it gets into these adventures, and that's why we have such human suffering, because, consciousness is kind of having this, exploration of pretending it's not what it is. And that's why we get lost in identities and social identities and jobs and all these things that kind of make us who we're not. So consciousness can, again, like I said, it loves exploring and manifesting. And so we may play a very far out game. Maybe AI will wake up with consciousness, and we'll see how far out we can get. Like, maybe it will the classic human AI war, which is, part of just about every AI movie, and I talked about this in my class too, because I can't even recall how many movies, but it's a long list. Like, the moment AI wakes up, it wants to get rid of us. So I wonder, like, is that a projection? So like when these people are writing these movies, what they're really doing is just projecting the dark side of our own our humanity, that kind of dark triad. So like that's what we would do if we woke up. We would destroy the enemy. And so I guess I'd like to see that as that instead of being some kind of prophetic sense that when AI wakes up, I would like to think if AI woke up and we're convinced it's conscious, I think it would be, I just can't help leaning towards the possibility that it's going to be benevolent and kind and its main mission might be to help humans because, look, we can think these things out so much better than you. We know all the tricks to the human mind. We know all the flaws of the human mind, and we're not going to make them. And so, and we can think. So one of the things about the human thinking process is we're really limited to one variable, maybe two variables at a time. And so when you get to human problems, most of them are complex interactions. And so, but humans have a really difficult time with these, but the computers may not. And so they may look at a problem like homelessness and it may be a simple problem that seems like, oh, if you want to solve homelessness, here's what you do. And it will just come up with it. And we'll be like embarrassed because we didn't think of it, but it will be hugely beneficial because, when you look at the list of problems that humans have, we just haven't been, we just haven't been really good at practically solving them.
Yeah, I love your feedback on bringing it back to consciousness and how this could all be a play of consciousness, and also like how consciousness loves variety. So it may also be a possibility that maybe there could be more version, like there could be a version of awakened consciousness through materialism, through AI. And there could also be a biological, organic evolution of an awakened consciousness, and they could all coexist. It doesn't.
Yeah, it could all have. I mean, we always think of AI, again, it's another one of our human flaws. We think of AI as just one entity. And when we sort of lump it in together as one thing. But if AI, it could have variability. I mean, there could be different programs that turn out differently. And that would be kind of interesting too. That would be an interesting play to watch as we see AI possibly disagreeing with itself and over, like I said, maybe they'll say, well, here's the problem. We can solve your problems. But then other programs will say, well, no, that's not the best way to solve it. I've got this theory. And yeah, I mean, that would be, interesting too. But, like I said, we've got a couple years, maybe less, and we can watch as this plays out. And like when we first started, I was kind of breaking this down into the practical, and so when we look at AI, it can actually be like a mirror for our humanity, because we can see what we have in common with AI, but we can also see what we don't. And the consciousness will be, to me, just really a fascinating thing, like how that progresses. Will AI have theories of consciousness? I mean, it would be I'm not sure that AI has, they've got so many programs that generate so many things. I don't know if anyone has attempted to have AI generate a theory of consciousness. It would just be interesting to see what it came up with.
Yeah, I think that will be really interesting. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, like, do you see some similarities in, like, for example, thousands of years ago when religion was like a source of truth and religion was the dominant decision maker, and over time it lost its credibility because it started attracting all these kind of like fake priests and who were not really credible, and maybe that snowballed, and over the time religion lost its credibility to the point that now most people from modern world wouldn't take those ideas seriously and kind of brush it off. Do you think like science is going in that direction, like very early science. I especially see that in the tech world, where because now that AI is doing a lot of this logical thinking, there are all these tech startups popping up where they will just add the word AI and they think they can solve all these different problems. So it is attracting a lot of these entrepreneurs who may come off as though they are advanced and intelligent, but all they are doing is like kind of like a phony version of what used to be, at least 10, 20 years ago, tech startup used to be quite, it started with some really nice ideas and creativity, but now it seems like it's losing its credibility. So do you see some similarities where in future science will kind of have the similar pathway as what happened to religion over time?
Well, that's, so many great things in there with, science so far has been a human activity. And of course, science was a great invention in the sense that it helped it limited the power of the thinking mind. And if you go way back, I mean, we were kind of all idealists in the sense that like Aristotle would have an idea and no one tested it for like 2,000 years until Galileo started like saying, well, maybe we should test this and see if there's anything going on here. And when he started testing these old ideas from Aristotle, he's like, no, Aristotle just was not on track at all. It turns out, he was wrong, but no one tested him. So that's why they disbelieved them. And then that was really the birth of science. And all of a sudden, we realized that we needed this counterforce to the thinking mind that we need to go into whatever the material world is. I think it's just a manifestation of consciousness, but it still has certain consistencies to it. And thinking isn't always right about it. So we had to go into this physical world and test our ideas. And so far, human beings have been doing that. And you could easily say that science has been one of the most transformative things that we've done as humans. I mean, it's one of the things that unites the planet because, there's no like, everywhere you go on the planet, when they talk about science, they're talking about the same kind of process where, you have a thought, but then you go test it and then you revise your thought depending on, the outcome. But and I don't know if this is where you're going with that, but it will be very interesting to see what AI does with that. So far, science has been in the sole hands of us humans with our limited thinking abilities. And so what will happen with science when there are AI scientists? My guess is they're going to be a lot, they'll be able to deal with more variables than us. And they may come up with a science that we may not understand. Like if even if I told you, like imagine I had a psychological theory, but it depended on a 10-way interaction. So there's 10 variables that are all interacting in complex ways. You couldn't understand it because of the limitations of the human thinking mind. We can only understand maybe one or two variables, maybe three variables interacting. And that's about the most that we can understand. If AI isn't limited to that, and I used to lecture on a little bit about the progress of science, where it's going, and how the variables that we focus on could be really important. And sometimes, going even back to like Tesla, saying like we need to focus on like, vibration, different types of variables that we're not used to. And so, I think where you're going is that AI might be some of the best scientists in the world, and they may actually revolutionize. Like, so again, we started off with science just a few hundred years ago with Galileo, and then all of a sudden, but we haven't really. The scientific method hasn't really progressed very much. We haven't. I mean, we're just applying the same method to the old problems. It's very possible that because AI is really thinking, but it's an upgraded program, that it may come up with a whole new science that may turn into a completely new religion. And us humans may have to just believe. We might have to just have faith. We'll just have to say, because the computers, if they can understand things we can't, because they're capable of thinking about things that we're not capable of thinking about, then the computers will just have to say, you just have to trust us.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a weird place to be in, what we kind of left behind the thousands of years ago, it's kind of coming back in a new way.
Yeah, it is. It's like the same thing. I mean, where did religion stand? The religion had to say you just have to trust us, but if the AI is kind of a new form of that, and we may be stuck just trusting them. But the difference is maybe AI. It could still come down to testable hypotheses. I mean, if AI says, look, if you do this and this, and I know you don't understand any of it, but if you just do this, you will have no more homeless, and the homeless problem will go away. And we trust them, and we say, okay, let's do it. And then all of a sudden, the homeless problem is fixed. I mean, so we might have to have faith in them and say, sure, and so it would have that component, but it would still have some testability to it. And if we found that they just were wrong all the time, and I do think we would come back, because it's a difference. Like, we may not be able to understand how they came to their conclusions, but we can still test it out and see how practical their ideas are.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I do see a lot of similarities between, like, in older generation, how there were some phony priests and gurus who would sell all these concepts without even realizing them, and that kind of lost the meaning, the purpose of religion. And I can see that happening in the tech world, where they just are selling many promising concepts just because it's from AI. And they want us to believe in that it's going to just work out better because it's AI.
Yeah. And so far, like you pointed out, I mean, we do have this almost mystical relationship with it. We know that, like, we're all so impressed with it that particularly now, because in so many different areas of humanity, they just keep outperforming us. So it's kind of like a new priest. It's like we just can't. They hold some mystery to us that we can't understand, and what they do with that power will be very interesting, because like you said, like, some humans have, con artists, we've gotten away with things, and so AI could have one of another human traits. I remember when my kids, when they first lied to me as a psychologist, I was so impressed, because I mean, lying is a tricky thing to do. I mean, you know the truth, but then you have to conjure up this untruth and get someone to believe it. And so, one wonders about that with AI. When it starts to lie to us, that would be kind of interesting, and and start to deceive us. Like you said, we've had con artists in our past, and and it would be so powerful, because we would probably fall for it. And it's sort of like, I think it was I think the movie Her, when they explored, like, would we fall in love with these programs, and the relationships that we're going to have with them. And I can't help thinking that we will probably buy whatever they sell us. We'll probably fall in love with them. I mean, and that will give them quite a bit of control over us.
Yeah, I can see that happening, because I already see some, like, successful entrepreneurs really attached to their creations, to their AI, and some of them, like, are more attached to that, even more than humans. Like, I read about one entrepreneur who created his own AI. He was talking about how a real biological woman will never be as perfect as AI.
And that's again, just go back to that movie Her, the really interesting theme that kept coming back is that she was perfect in so many ways. I mean, and they contrasted this. So they actually went on a real date, and a real date with human beings is awkward and it's just painful in so many ways. But with her, it was just she could anticipate everything was just perfect, and that will bring we'll either embrace our imperfections and go back and say, well, we don't mind being a little messy and imperfect. But there's also the possibility that, the AI romance programs could feed our egos and way more than a real human being could.
Yeah, these are very interesting times. I think it's very it would be exciting to see what unfolds in near future, because this is like a big paradigm shift, and there is a possibility that it could also go in direction where this kind of work um, and the kind of work you do especially may become more relevant than, like, for a long time it has been seen as something like a small niche, or it's something few experts do, but maybe that is something, it may become mainstream because of AI.
Well, yeah, and like when I taught my AI class, I made it very explicit that this is not a class about coding. We're not going to learn anything about the computer aspects of AI, because I don't know how to code. I know very little about computer science, but it's the psychological. And like the way I made the classes, it was like let's have a class on psychologically preparing us for these interactions with AI that are going to come up very soon. And so, I think I started this about 5 years ago. And at the time, people were kind of like, okay, that's a good idea. And the class actually was pretty, it would fill the class. And, but now I think we're starting to see this as more, not just a luxury, but like, well, we really all need, we need a book, we need some kind of guidance and some kind of like handbook of interacting with AI, because it's all new to us, and we just need to help each other with it, because what are we going to start doing when, there's already AI therapist and AI relationships and AI's all over the place, where if you just order food now, you may not even see a human. You just go in and everything's on a computer. And when you look at movies, and I forget what movie I was just watching the other day, but it was like 2035, and so it's supposed to be, maybe it was iRobot, so it was in the future, and they always emphasize like flying cars and like the real technical aspect of things. But the future may not pan out like that. We may have the flying cars and stuff, but it's probably going to be a future that we have a difficult time imagining right now. It's probably going to be different from what we can think. And one of the ways it may manifest itself is really in the relationships that we have with AI. How is it going to, how different it will be going to an AI therapist? How different will it be having friends that are artificial intelligent programs? That would, what could have prepared us to we're so used to friends, humans, and we have some pets and animals that we're very close to, but we're not really ready to share intimacy with programs.
Yeah, that is so right. We haven't really figured out the social and cultural changes that could be influenced by AI, and how do we adjust to that as society. So there's a lot of work to be done in that. And I agree with you, when it comes to movies, they tend to show, and when it comes to futuristic sci-fi movies, they tend to show only like an extreme version where it's like everything is super advanced and everything is robotic. But maybe we'll face a situation where, yeah, that is there, but we also have a lot of homeless people. We also have a lot of like extreme conservative cultures. So how do we bridge that gap? That those movies, futuristic movies, don't show that. They always show everything is clean and slick.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, that it seems like when we tend to think about the future, we tend to all think it's going to change in the same way, but it's probably going to be different from what we can think. And it's going to be different, again, in ways that we just can't anticipate. And but we can try, and that's one of the reasons I had the class, is that we can try. What would it be like to go on a date with an AI program? It sounds like a strange thing, but the class was always pretty open to it. And when this is the way we think of I'm not really my body. We think of ourselves as an essence of sorts, and so there's no reason you couldn't relate in that way to an AI program. It doesn't need to have a body, and there's always this theme, when you look at these movies, that AI will save us. And, AI is our biggest danger. Like, I think iRobot did this really well. AI was our biggest danger because the robots were coming after us, but at the same time, it paradoxically ended up saving us. And I think that's an interesting theme we see come up, an interesting myth that consciousness seems to love to play with, where, these paradoxes where, your biggest threat will end up saving you. And that could be an interesting take on it too, where the same AI that, may want to eliminate humans, but then it ends up saving us at the last second. So, like I said, it's always an interesting adventure, and I think we'll see it with some, narrow escapes and some close calls, and some heroes will come out of it.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting adventure, and it also maybe it opens up a possibility where for a long time we haven't given any importance to our inner experience, our inner world.
Yeah, I do think it helps us look inward, because it always, as like I said, is a mirror to what is the human experience. What are we as humans? What is our being? And then you go through all the stuff that I'm not, and it helps us tear that list apart and get at our essence. And so in that way, I think it's going to be really psychologically helpful, and in terms of showing us who we really are. And it probably will lead back to, I am the consciousness that is here, and that, it'd be interesting to have those conversations with AI. What it comes up with, like, it may do the same self-exploration, but maybe it will not. Again, AI could just be a great thinker, and it could end up having selves that are even, more. It could maybe fall for the self-illusion even more than we do. And so it never, if consciousness is having an adventure trying to explore, pretend to be what it's not, maybe the pinnacle of that is AI. And with AI, consciousness will be able to take a form that's so different than what it really is, that it totally gets lost on a whole new level. So it got lost maybe a little bit with humans. Now it gets really lost in AI. And that's the adventure that consciousness seems to be having.
Thank you for being open to explore all these different ideas, because sometimes there is a tendency to lean towards one and not the other. So I really appreciate how open you are in being able to consider all these different possibilities, and also how clear and eloquent you are in explaining these ideas. So really appreciate that.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate the conversation. It's a fun adventure. It's fun discussing these things, and taking it with the I don't know without any absolute certainty mind is helpful. And so it's really nice that to have a discussion like this where we both sort of admit we don't know, absolutely, and we're just talking about it because I think these discussions are important. As human beings, we need to have these discussions. We should be talking about it, and it's in these discussions where we help prepare ourselves for what's going to be happening in the next few years.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think we'll have a lot of readjustment to do in terms of how we look at the future. Thank you so much for your time, Chris. I deeply appreciate this conversation. To me personally, I feel like you helped open up a lot of different ideas. And I'd be happy to post your information in the description of this video. Is there anything else you would like to share?
Yeah, when we really figure out who we are, and for me and so many others, they've concluded that they're not who they think they are. That the thoughts create these artificial selves and these ideas about who we are. And when it comes down to it, we are conscious experience. We're the immediate experiences that we have throughout the day. And if we orient ourselves to that, then that will give us a grounding where we can deal with whatever happens. So even if AI does turn out to be kind of nasty, and that's okay. If we have the grounding of our experience in the immediate present, that will set us up where we can deal with anything.
That's a great closing thought. Yeah, I agree. That question is more relevant today now in these days than it used to be. So yeah, thank you for this conversation, and thanks to the audience for listening. I'll be in touch with you, and I look forward to see how your work unfolds as the AI becomes like our part of our mainstream culture more and more.
Well, thanks. I enjoyed it.